Paul was a made-up character, and the letters are sort of a forgery. And they create this false narrative for this guy or whatever.
You know, I said I would ask your question to the academics. Thank you to those who took heed and joined the Patreon, becoming part of the family. You are the very reason that this platform exists. So all thanks to you. First question to Dr. Richard Carrier from Victor Engelman. Does he believe St. Paul existed? I might add, if so, why?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I do. I'm convinced of that. But it's a legitimate question. And in fact, it's a question that's been asked recently in like peer-reviewed literature. Like it's being taken seriously, this idea that maybe he didn't exist. So you've got Nina Livesey and maybe even Marcus Vincent thinking about the possibility that Paul was a made-up character, and the letters are sort of a forgery, and they create this false narrative for this guy or whatever. But there's a lot of different models of that. Like, so what was written first? Was Acts written first, then the letters? Were the letters written first, and then Acts, and so on? And so there's a lot to dive into if you wanted to get into that. Myself, I have 2 articles on this, and on the historicity of Paul and on why we date him to the 50s. You have another video clip on high and low chronology that we talk about. That's a whole other question. But I also have a series on Nina Livesey's theory. That's the most recent, most thoroughly argued one. And so if you want to see why I'm convinced that Paul was a historical person, that's probably the best place to start, is to read that series. Not only so that you get my perspective, but also so you get hers. So you see that there's actually like serious scholars in serious academic publications doubting the historicity of Paul now. So if you want to get into that debate, you can see it there and see both sides of it.
Do you think that a lot of the reasons you're persuaded is just based on the reading of these letters? I mean, because Nina, her chronology is different. She's assessing the letters as second sophistic in vein with this kind of fictional epistolary schools of thinking, and it's a really awesome, I think, thing to consider to hypothesize what if, right?
Yeah.
We need more of those what ifs.
It's more than that, because 90% of early Christian literature is forged. So forgery is the normal mode of things, right? So it's completely plausible to ask, like, well, how many letters are forged? Could it be all of them? Because that's not ridiculous to suggest, right? So you really do need to like rule that out before you like rule in, okay, we're going to count, let's say, these 6 letters as authentic and the others as forged. You can't just hand wave that. Like, you really do have to have a good reason to be doing that, rather than just saying, well, they're probably all forged because the Christians are forging shit all the time, right?
Right.
So like that's
UAPs and UFOs, in a way, like most of them are BS.
That's right, yeah.
So there's a good reason.
If you're going to argue that there's a real one, then yeah, you've got some work set out for you, right? And yeah, so the Christian tendency to produce fake letters and things like that kind of casts suspicion on all the letters. So yeah, so you have to do a little extra work, and I do that. Like I actually did take this seriously. I says, well, then should I count these? In my original study, I just went with the consensus, because that the whole point was arguing a fortiori. Is like,
you were already pushing the
yeah, right, exactly. I want to take as many consensus positions as possible and show the results still, even when those positions you get the thing, rather than stepping too far out of my lane. But even then I had the sense of like, I'm pretty sure these are the things, so I don't talk about it there. But I do talk about my reasons in these articles I mentioned on my blog. So if you want to dive into that, that's where you get it. But yeah, for me, it is looking at the letters in terms of there are features of the letters that are weird, that not what we expect for forgeries. Because we know what forgeries look like. We know how forgers work. We know what their motives usually operate, and how they operate to produce the things that they produce. These letters don't have those signatures. They have the contrary signatures. They have signatures of authenticity. Like the kind of overarching way to describe it is they're messy. They're messy in their construction. They're messy in their narrative, in ways that make more sense as if this is organically happening, like an actual person writing these letters. Now, it's complicated also by the fact that the letters we have are edited. So that creates a problem as well. But that's also part of what I'm talking about, is that forgers don't need to edit their letters, right? Like, the fact that the letters had to be edited suggests that there were real letters that someone wanted to fix, quote unquote. Whereas if you're forging them, you just forge them straight up the way you want them. You don't forge them then dislike what you forged and then fix them. Right. So like, so that's, and there's a lot of examples of like things that have been cut out and so on, and pieces mashed together of different letters and stuff like that. It looks like someone is working on a real corpus. It doesn't look like a forged corpus.
I know this feels a little ad hoc because the more you add, the harder it is to prove something. But I know that like Dutch radicals, Robert Price, and I think Nina has been persuaded to some degree that these might be Christians in the name of Paul, communities in the name of Paul that are somehow behind this. I think,
which is that it's mainstream because there are the forged letters, right? And there are more forged, like half the letters in the New Testament are forged, right? But there's a ton more forged letters, right, outside the New Testament. So we know, like that, what you just said is we know they're doing this, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not like something we're making up, right?
I think that they just push it back to the 7, and they say that they think that this is what's going on here too.
That's right.
And you would just disagree or interpret.
Yeah. And I talked about the internal evidence. I also think the external evidence doesn't line up with their theories also. So I think like the letters look naive for the 2nd century versus the 2nd century forgeries look like they're written in the 2nd century, whereas these look like they don't even know what happened between the 50s and the 150s, right? So like the letters look like someone who doesn't know the future, whereas forgers know the future because they're in it, right? They're right. They know what's happened because for them the future is past. So they can construct their letters with a knowledge of that. Even when they're trying to look like they don't know that stuff creeps in terms of modifying what arguments they make, how they structure their letters and things like that. So that, I think the external evidence, but this is again a disagreement because the Livesey and Vincent and stuff would argue the contrary. They would say that like the external evidence lines up and so on. So like if you really want to solve this, you've got to read all the arguments and figure it out, but which I've done, and that's why I've landed where I am. So if you want to know why, that's because I went through all of that. But if you want to see it summarized, it's in those articles on my blog.
Thank you, Victor, for being a patron.